very definite boosterism kind of approach to the development of Vancouver and the hub in British Columbia. Where the counterpoint to that, the opposition that grew and became team, where did the vision come, the competing vision for Vancouver come from?
I don't know whether it's one single source or even one single vision or even one very clear vision at the time. It was obvious that the freeway proposal would drastically affect Vancouver in very simple ways. It would cut us off from our birthright, which was the water. Very important. This was terribly critical, and once and for all, it would deny us access, which already was difficult, because the Port Authority and all the other industrial uses had already preempted access. So that free would have destroyed any opportunity of real water access. And the second thing was that it would have destroyed the essential neighborhoods through which it would rush through, you know, the East End and of course ultimately Chinatown. But it was those two things. And then the question really was what to do with the result of all the cars. You know, where do you put them once they're downtown? And there wasn't any clear idea as to link that to land use. Yes, we had zoning, but that was different in a sense from the ultimate use of the downtown peninsula. And the model, of course, was that it should be a what's the word? Your father tried to make me understand this many times. CBD, and how that would grow, and whether this would be, you know, high rise or in some other way. So the question really was how to prevent this from happening, and the water access was very central to this issue, both in the West End and in the downtown core and Chinatown and what is now all the rest of the East Side. But I think it's important to remember that it was a hotly debated issue. There was, you know, no clear-cut. Yes, there was a vision, but the vision was really, in a sense, a simple thing. It wasn't, as I remember it, some grand scheme. Now, there were various competing visions. 1958, Erickson and four of us got together and developed a vision for the West End. I don't know if you've ever seen that. That was called Group 58, and there were five of us, and who actually sat down and drew what we thought the West End could be like in this process of transition, of transformation. And the drawings are still there, and Arthur is still very proud of that. Would that vision have gone through? I'm not sure whether the results would have been all that spectacular, but it would have in fact addressed the question of the grid system, because we said at the time that transforming just the zoning without changing the access pattern and the grid allocation of lots just doesn't work. So that was our basic point, 58. So there were many attempts by interested groups, architects, engineers, all kinds of people, certainly the Board of Trade and people around that group of businessmen, of how it could become, you know, a much more important metropolis than it was. Vancouver was a small town until certainly the end of the 60s. So the vision changed over time and was the result of enormous public debates. I mean, this is the Planning Commission played an important role, the Board of Trade played an important role, and ultimately the political system, because after the public hearing at John Oliver, it was obvious that it had to become a political issue, a local party political issue. And by party, I mean an actual issue around which people would stand for office at City Council, and that's when Walter moved into running for City Council, and I went to run for school board, which was very important to us. And of course, if you remember, the first success of team was that we swept the school board, and that was both an important point of attack, counter-attack, and training. You know, Fritz Bowers and I topped the polls at the school board, and I was its chairman for 2 years. And that was a political platform from which we then began to organize what turned out to be a two attempt capturing city council. Without the initial success in Parks Board, we wouldn't have made it.
That was in 1968.
That's right.
That was when Dad was first elected as
That's
alderman.
correct. Yeah.
And then Mr.
He-
Phillips got in on the recount.
That's right. And he was the first in, and I was the first in on the city, on the town plan, on the school board.
Do you remember who was involved in the initial setup of team, the core group?
Oh yeah, sure. Well, some of it happened right here, actually in our old house. There's one person that particularly is significant, which has been like kind of lost. I think I mentioned to you the other day, Elsa Larsen. Is that a name that you remember at all?
Mhm.
In fact, I was quite impressed to find quite recently that now the Parks Board actually set aside a wonderful spot on Kitsilano Beach called Elsa's Point.
Yes, no, I walk down there all the time.
That's right. Well, that's a woman that deserves a lot of credit, together with all kinds of other people around the table, and most of the names are still around. I'm trying to remember. It was the mayor of New Westminster, no, the mayor of West Vancouver, which is a wonderful guy, who in fact is a lawyer, and he incorporated us, and he invented the word team. In other words, what is he was a wonderful guy. It's in my records. He was a very robust and well-regarded local politician. Ultimately served on Canada Post. It'll come to me. Anyway, he was a very important point because while we had enthusiasm around the table, the mechanics, like incorporating and creating a legal entity called the Team Electors Action Movement, wasn't something you do overnight unless you know how to do this. And he was the one who knew how to do it, and he took us, and we paid some money, and he incorporated us, and he created then this thing called Team by, bringing together what was a very awkward collection of words. But the word team obviously worked, so that was his contribution. And there were several others. I have to go back and actually unearth some of the names who at the time were very central to the idea of, and the idea was very simple. It had to become a part of political issue. It couldn't go on as a kind of side issue amongst other public events. And it had to get enough people around it who would actually run on the platform, and therefore, for the first time in Vancouver, actually launch a civic party with a platform. I mean, up until 1968, everybody ran on, I'm a good guy, look at me, don't I look wonderful, and I'll help you. But what never occurred? City council was composed of all kinds of people, willing and able, but A, they had no coherence, no cohesion because they didn't belong to a party, it was an NPA, and the other is they had no platform. So the important thing of Team in '68 was to change that process, to make it a party political issue, to create a party, to create a platform, and to get enough people to commit to a joint policy, set of joint policies, and hang together through caucus. In other words, introduce the idea of a political system at the local level as distinct from letting it all be free-for-all.
Why didn't you run for city council?
Well, for two reasons. We had at the time decided that we ought to spread our resources and learn how to do it. It's not something you do, you may be different, but in those days we wanted to learn how to do this and to set the stage for what was to come. We knew we couldn't get 11 seats or 6 or 9 or whatever it was. So it was a very deliberate choice. And your father was amongst those who said, no, we'll do this in stages. And we, in a sense, allocated each other's skills and resources. I was always interested in education for obvious reasons. And the school board was another area which had already messed up all kinds of things. And I said, no, I'd like to run. And Fritz Bowles ran with me, and one more. There were 3 of us. And we all got in. And we topped the polls. And in fact, I topped the polls to the point where I had more votes than Tom Campbell, who never forgave me for that, although he was elected as mayor. And your father got in, and then Art got in by recount. So those are the two, and we had 3 in city council, on the Parks Board, and there was somebody on the school board, and there was some on the Parks Board. I've forgotten what that was. But anyway, it was sufficiently reasonable to have a caucus amongst those 3 levels of elected individuals. Another thing that never happened before. You know, the Parks Board didn't talk to the school board, didn't talk to the city council. Well, now we suddenly have an opportunity of saying, all right, so what's going to be our policy on neighborhood planning, e.g. neighborhood centers, e.g. school location, e.g. after our school use? I mean, these were very real issues. And there was never an opportunity of discussing it because these 3 levels of elected officials all had their own flag to wave. So the idea of caucusing amongst city council, school board, parks board was in itself an innovation. We would meet every other week or something, and I would read the council minutes. Never had that done before. And that was very important, so that we would each know what the rest of the system would plot. And believe me, they were all plotting, because they had all kinds of other things they wanted to do, which didn't add up.
Now, were they the other politicians or the civil servants?
Primarily the other civil servants, but the politicians were, in a sense, amiable because they had no alternatives. You know, when I've forgotten what the title was, the Stu LaFoe. Stu LaFoe was the superintendent of parks. And Stu LaFoe appeared at the Parks Board meeting with a proposal. Who was going to oppose him? He was, by definition, impressive, well qualified, well prepared. He had an attack, he had a process, he had a budget. So are you going to question that? Yes, if you have studied the minutes from previous meetings and checked with city council and with other agencies and said, well, just a minute, Stu, are you sure about this? Well, so yes, the answer to your question is public service clearly ran the machinery. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's what they're supposed to do. But the elected officials must be able to, from an informed basis, question their proposals and not merely accept because it's being presented. And that was a very important lesson we all had to learn. And it took 2 years for us to learn this. So the success, in my view,
I'm just concerned about, are we okay on the sound?
Yeah, we can't have that. We need overpowered voices.
just tell it, lie low. Anyway, do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, of course. I'm curious.
By the way, that lesson is still to be learned today.
I'm lost.
We're okay?
No, I thought it was that, but.
Why they think they know better?
Pardon?
Why the civil servants think they know better?
Well, that's their job, 9 to 5, not better. Look, all the elected officials, certainly at that time, at best, part-time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I mean, they were there for 2 or 3 meetings a week, and that was it. You know, city council didn't spend night upon night reading minutes. You know, they were all businessmen that ran Nelson Laundry. You know, the guy who runs Nelson Laundry is not going to spend his time studying subject. Okay. So, in a nutshell, what happened in '68 as a result of the freeway debate was to transform, over time, city council from a simply making decisions upon the recommendation of the staff to a well-prepared, policy-oriented group of people with ultimately a majority so that they could actually act, and therefore either accept or reject or modify what the public servant had proposed, and in fact ultimately, as you well know, make sure that the right public officials are in the right job. Sutton Brown had to go when the majority was there to allow this to happen. So it was clearly, it wasn't, you know, a revolt with barricades, but it was a radical change of how to do business. How to go from a essentially small scale, small town kind of notion of housekeeping to a determined, policy-based initiative of deliberate change based on consultation and debate.
Where did it shift
End
though,
of lecture.
towards a neighborhood town center approach as opposed to, okay, let's just put the suburbs here, the industrial area here. The whole notion of mixed use, which actually was quite European in tenor in many respects. When did that start to permeate the values and vision of the group?
Well, I'm not sure I can give you a direct answer, but the